Topic 6 on hedge funds is made up of 5 readings. The first one, the structure of the hedge fund industry, looks at characteristics of hedge funds that differentiate them from traditional investment vehicles like mutual funds, looks at fees associated with hedge funds. Also, we broadly look at the different strategies that are implemented by hedge funds, and also talk about hedge fund indices. And then the remaining chapters look at each of the sort of key strategies that are implemented by hedge funds in more detail. So 6.2 looks at the macro strategy and managed futures. 6.3 focuses on event-driven strategies. So these are sort of corporate events that are non-recurring. And then relative value looks, 6.4 looks at relative value strategies, and 6.5 looks at equity hedge funds. All right, so we start here by just looking at what we term the primary elements of hedge funds. Obviously, a hedge fund is an investment vehicle or a pool, and it has a number of sort of distinguishing characteristics. So here are 4 of them. So one, that they're privately organized, and they obviously, since they're a pool, a fund, they pool capital from qualified investors. They charge performance-based fees, which is not something that's charged by traditional investment vehicles. And then they have other characteristics. Their use of leverage is high relative to traditionals, the use of derivatives, short positions, etc. And of course, they're far less regulated than traditional investment vehicles that are available to the public. And then always keeping in mind some of these key words. So any legislation or regulation that's available generally has some kind of safe harbor, some exemption that can be applied to get out of a particular regulation. So the 1940 Investment Company Act has a safe harbor that allows hedge funds not to have to register with the SEC, so they're exempt if, for instance, they have no public advertising, don't engage in any public advertising or offerings. Hedge funds also have characteristics that differentiate them from traditional mutual funds and make them much more flexible. So you want to know what these are, that basically they can invest in more, private instruments. They use a lot more leverage. They use a lot more derivative contracts, that sort of thing. And then you can see here, we have a table where we tabulate some of the characteristics of hedge funds versus mutual funds for different parameters. So for example, registration of the manager, the hedge fund manager, is actually required by both entities. But for example, disclosure requirements is sort of established and very detailed for mutual funds, but more voluntary for hedge funds. Of course, it does depend. There are increasingly more regulations now in the US and in the EU and other places where they are really trying to get managers who have a significant amount in assets under management, basically, instituting regulation for those large managers. And then little discussion up here about the growth of the industry. So, obviously there's a significant interest in hedge funds, and why is that? So the service diversifiers, for example, the investment flexibility is really ideal, and they provide attractive returns. But we saw after the global financial crisis considerable consolidation